We have some breaking news for you. The Supreme Court rejected a bid to restrict access to the abortion pill. The court said that the anti-abortion doctors who questioned the FDA's easing of access to the pill just didn't have legal standing to sue. This was a unanimous ruling. Meanwhile, the Senate is set to vote today on legislative package to protect in vitro fertilization access, or IVF. This comes as the 2-year anniversary of the overturning of Roe v. Wade approaches. The chamber will vote on a bill that defends the right for women to receive IVF services and require insurance plans to cover these very pricey procedures. The bill is sponsored by Democratic Senators Tammy Duckworth, Patty Murray, Cory Booker. Duckworth tried to pass the bill in February, but one Republican senator objected.
Let's hear what two of the bill sponsors, Senators Murray and Duckworth, had to say yesterday during a press conference ahead of today's vote.
The Right to IVF Act protects the right to IVF. It lowers IVF costs for families, including our service members and veterans who should never have to sacrifice their ability to start their families.
Republicans have made this a political issue already, and so we can end this right now by them voting yes on this bill.
The red states of Alabama ruled in February that embryos in IVF are considered children under the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act. Within the first week of the ruling, 2 of the 8 fertility clinics in Alabama paused their IVF treatments in fear that embryos could be destroyed. You could say the abortion and reproductive rights issue is one the Republican Party is still trying to figure out their messaging on. After the Supreme Court ruled on Dobbs, many red states have either tried to ban or severely restrict the right to terminate a pregnancy, although those efforts have actually not fared very well. So I think Republicans do recognize that this issue is a little bit of their Achilles heel going into the election. It's the only issue that Biden polls, it's like absolutely the only issue that Biden polls better on than Trump, although Trump, like other national Republicans, Nikki Haley and others, have said that there should be no federal abortion policy. The point of overturning Roe is to let the states decide, and if the states decide they would like to continue allowing people to have abortions with some restrictions, no restrictions, whatever the case may be, that is on the states, and that is what the messaging has mostly been about now.
It looks like the Republican Party is caught up now with trying to play catch up with the pro-life movement, which really overplayed their hand. And you looked at Kansas, for example, where they left it as a referendum for people to decide if they wanted a constitutional ban. And wow, did they reject that in that otherwise very red state, right? That was a state speaking up for how they wanted regulations to go. But there is still that idea of healthcare access and how much the government should be involved in determining what happens in a woman's body and the doctor, like those decisions. The idea that this quote-unquote abortion pill, which has often been used in the worst situations to clear out a miscarriage, really heart-wrenching stories about why this pill actually gets used. It's different than Plan B, which I know is, contraception idea, but the idea of this pill now becoming something that the Supreme Court and doctors say they don't believe in the science and the medicine anymore, so they should be able to go to court and stop people from using something they've been using for years. I am glad that the Supreme Court declared that those doctors don't have standing to question how medicine and women should be interacting, but it does show this desire to really continue to move the needle more and more into an invasive space into women's bodies.
Look, I don't have any desire to restrict women from having access to this pill, so that's fine with me, although I was having a conversation with Rising Fridays host Amber Duke the other day, who's more socially conservative than I am, and she's very pro-life. And she was saying that her view on this, or why she was more sympathetic to the doctors who were trying to sue, is that the outcome of that would have been you needed to go see a doctor and get a prescription to get this. And she says that would be a better outcome rather than people taking matters into their own hands and getting it over the counter. Now, I, as a libertarian, think that basically everything should be available over the counter, and I don't want to create more hurdles for people to jump through to take safe drug, experimental drugs, whatever you want. I think if you want to seek out a doctor's opinion, that should be on you. So I'm like different on that ideologically, but from her argument is that it's not about restricting that. It's about saying you should talk to a doctor about whether that is the right option for you, because it can be.
Well, and usually this
dangerous.
is something that doctors will advise a woman that they should use or should not use, right? So doctors will also tell you to go take Tylenol for a fever versus something more invasive. So then you go and buy it over the counter, right? But there is something about the idea of a sperm cell and an egg cell that really starts to freak people out about how involved government should be in regulating that. But it's not. This is also probably going to freak you out, Bobby. The Southern Baptist Convention, massive, socially conservative, powerful movement of evangelicals, just yesterday voted to say that IVF should not be allowed. Now, this is something that is as pro-life as you can get, which is using medicine and science to help families conceive. So this is the end result that we have right now of the Supreme Court having overturned Dobbs. The pro-life movement is now going forward with restricting otherwise wonderful opportunities for people to advance because of science and medicine. And the logic is actually in the Dobbs decision, was that the idea of conception being decided. The government now gets to decide when conception happens. So a sperm and an egg cell that are frozen and have not continued to grow into anything else, or just frozen in time, now is equal to a human being. It's like saying a seed is now an oak tree because of the potential of that seed.
I don't agree that that's saying the government is deciding. What Dobbs has allowed is for the people to decide. Previously, it was I would argue, totally made up, wholly invented, read into the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, something that the founders took no position on, that our founding documents have nothing to say about, and saying there was this automatic right to an abortion at virtually any time frame, and there could be very little or practically no restrictions on it, even if majorities, even if democracies wanted that. It was counter-democratic. Now that has been undone, and states can decide. We have 50 of them, and if there are people who are more conservative one state versus another state, they come up with a different set of restrictions, or none at all. That's up to the people to decide. I think this is an issue that is so fraught, and that there's enough of a difference of opinion. There is a majority in this country that wants abortion available under some circumstances, a lot of circumstances. There's also strong opposition to having abortion be available in all circumstances, up including to right before birth, reflecting the fact that, if you look at a fetus, if you look at the ultrasound, you're right, it does at the very beginning resemble more of a seed, not a baby or living, breathing person. And many people are sympathetic to the idea that at that stage, the harm you're doing is not significant enough for there to be some legal restriction on that. But a lot of people looking, several weeks or months into the pregnancy, looking at what the entity looks like, it looks like a baby, and a lot of people feel, well, at that point, sorry, except in maybe special circumstances like threats of health to the mother or something else, we think this practice ought to be more limited, yes, by government, just as harming your your spouse or your children or your pets is restricted by government.
So here's where I think the disconnect happens between both sides of the argument, is the feeling or idea that abortions are, handed out like candy as opposed to actual health care. Stillbirths, I have a family member right now who is going to have a DNC because the fetus died.
Sure.
Right?
It's terrible. Horrible.
Right? So, but these are actually shockingly common circumstances
No, I know.
that now, because government gets to make the decision at a state-by-state level, because they could just put everything under the umbrella of abortion, you have doctors who are not willing to do the procedures because they don't know if they're going to be legally liable. You have a former President Trump himself, who said, yeah, you should prosecute those women. You have states now saying you can't go out of state to go do this, and we will actually follow you and charge you if you decide to just freely move between states. So this is the challenge of taking something like science and healthcare and making it just up to states when the lawmakers are majority men who don't understand science and certainly aren't sitting here thinking about the actual implications of what happens in a woman's body in a uterus.
Yeah, I think a lot of this should not be done is politically toxic. And, right, like restricting people from moving to other states to have the procedure. I agree. I want to take government out of people's private medical decision, particularly in the wake of COVID, where people's private and personal medical decisions became national federal policy for millions of employees at Biden's personal orders. So I'm 100% with you there, and I know there are legitimate medical reasons to undergo that procedure. I think that's absolutely fine. I don't think it should be allowed, or I don't think it's a good thing in all circumstances. We have a lot of contraceptive options that I'm all for legalizing or making, having greater access to for men and women. Birth control, over the counter, the pill, everything else. There's a lot of ways to have more control over whether you're going to become pregnant that I think should be made easier for people so they don't find themselves in these circumstances. And there are legitimate medical reasons for it. So I don't, certainly not at the national level, and me personally as a voter want to place hard restrictions all across the board. But, I look at policies even in secular liberal Europe, in the UK, in France, and other places where they say, there's no questions asked up to 12, 15 weeks. And then past that, it's got to be a special medical reason. And I say that seems fine and reasonable to me. And if a state votes for something like that, it seems fine. Well,
that's part of the challenge, right? Is these special medical reasons are very clear in Europe that those are doctors' decisions, and we are lacking that clarity right now. And absent that clarity, you're going to have a lot of angry women and families. So, married men who are trying to start their families or figure out how that's going to go. A lot of those folks turning out this election cycle.
More Rising right after this.